Just doing the London recap for today. There was a potentially nice sell set up at the start of Frankfurt, but price spiked through my POI, so I left it because my trading plan says that if a POI is spiked, it's invalid. So yeah, played out nice. Entry model is very clean, but followed my rules, so I am happy enough with how I approached it. But I'll just do a quick rundown of the price on EU and AU. Hopefully, it might take some value from it. So obviously in the EU. Daily, we're obviously in the pullback. We've had the little bullish chalk and decent V-shaped recovery to the upside at this point. We've now come into this supply. It's just about at the EQ. We haven't just reached the EQ yet, but supply is just about at the EQ. So once the EQ is met, which is obviously if price pushes up a bit higher than here, we can roll over to the downside and put in the next bearish leg. There's this POI here, it's obviously a very high probability POI. You can see it's a flip zone because it reacted to this demand here. It swept liquidity there. It's completely unmitigated the range, so price never came near it. And yeah, there is also a decent probability the price can come up and mitigate this here, and also the extreme is mitigated by the range as well if you take the whole candle. So yeah, it's getting close to the point where we can possibly look for a continuation of the downside, but it is still valid to keep buying at this point. But it is slightly lower probability because it is possible that the pullback is nearly complete. So that's the daily. 4 hour, obviously quite a big swing range. It's the same as the daily actually, but I map my structure a bit more loosely, so you might currently have the 4 hours bullish, but this is the swing high and this is the swing low for me. Obviously we had the bullish IBOS here, and then we have the demand ranges being respected. So you can see we're approaching the EQ of the 4 hour leg as well. So my thinking this morning was that we were sitting around here, we mitigated this POI. Again, it's a valid POI, it's within the range, it's within the daily. So I was thinking it's possible that we may be able to take some sells, possibly to target this range and maybe the refined zone within it. But equally, I knew this POI, we could have pushed up higher to mitigate this here. So yeah, on the M15, I was thinking, yeah, we can keep looking for continuations to the upside on the M15. Although now we are approaching the EQ of the 4 hour and the daily leg, so it is slightly lower probability to keep buying at this point. And equally, I knew, having mitigated the daily, that if we saw signs of bearish intent in the M15, you know, an IBOS supply being respected, that it was decent value to look for sales because there was the possibility the price could come down here. So yeah, that's the 4 hour. The M15 then. I'll take it back to where price was sitting pre-session. So this is 645. So I had 2 internal structures. This was what I was viewing as the larger one, this range, and then I was viewing this here as sort of the smaller internal structure, which is basically the internal pullback of the internal structure, if that makes sense. So it wasn't ideal that we had mitigated this range. You can see we just tapped into it there, but you can see we had the bearish shock and then bearish IBOS. So I was bearing in mind that we are coming off the daily and 4 hour supply. I was happy to potentially look for sells within this supply to target at least this low, knowing that there was the possibility that we could come down here to mitigate the EQ of the leg. So yeah, I was happy to look for sells, but was aware that the M15 was bullish overall and the larger internal was bullish as well, so we could easily continue the upside. But I didn't really want to drop down to the M1 and look for buys until we sort of came to these zones here, which are within the 4 hour. Like you can see, it's at the EQ of the leg. This POI is nice. It led to this IBOS and the swing boss. It swept liquidity, so yeah, ideally I wanted to be buying from there, and if I was to buy from sort of within here, I wanted to see a sort of bullish M15 shock to sort of confirm that the level was going to hold, and confirm that the level was going to hold and give me fresh demand to trade from, as I was trying to say there, sorry. So yeah, there was a potential entry in there. I'll take you through it in a second, and then you can see price just spiked through the POI by literally a micro pip. Now, personally, in my eyes, this was the extreme unmitigated POI because this had already been mitigated. So the way I view supply and demand, personally, I don't trade sweeps. So in my eyes, this zone should have held and should have continued lower to run this week low. So this was the extreme POI. So personally, whenever price spiked through there, I was viewing that as a sign of potential bullish intent. There was a nice entry model that played out. You can see the week internal low was run as expected, but then we mitigated this little wick here. That was not a POI that I would have personally been looking for an entry from. You can see it had already been mitigated there and failed to put in a new high, but obviously the wick refinement ended up playing out. It's not a POI I have my radar to drop down to that one, but you can see we failed to close below the low, and then price sort of retraced quite aggressively. Now you could argue that there was valid supply there because it did cause price to wick the low, but when price fails to close below that low, that high is weak, so you're trading from a weak high, which is never ideal. And then you can see just the sheer amount of bullish momentum up, and bearing in mind that the larger internal and the swing are both bullish, and we've mitigated sort of this range. So I personally wasn't looking for sales at this point. I think we've got another sweep then. Yeah, you can see we got another bit of a sweep, which was technically a bullish chalk. So whenever this happened, I was looking for an entry within this supply, because obviously, yes, it's not ideal. This low is technically weak because it failed to close above this high, but sort of everything was bullish at this point. So the swing and larger internal, so I was happy to take the chance in here to potentially target this weak high. But there was no entry model. I can see we did push up and ran the weak high, but then again no close above, which means this low is weak, and then we're now pulling back down. We've pulled back into this supply here, so it remains to be seen if this will hold. But buys at this point, sort of when you're higher up in when you're approaching the EQ, the 4 hour and the day leg are slightly lower probability. You can't keep buying, but you have to accept it is lower probability to do so, and maybe you want to be a bit more conservative with the POI selection on the entry models. But on the M1 then, the entry model was very clean. You can see we just swept the high by literally a micro pip and just missed this refined M1 zone as well, which you can see it was very clean. Like, it was very clean inducement in front, so I would have expected that to be hit as well. But you can see a proper liquidation, where you can see we had this sort of high and then technically had the bearish chalk. So then this is like a true liquidation, where the fake chalk attracts early sellers into the market and then they get swept out, and that's ideally what you want to see. If this POI had held, I would have been all over this, but I followed my plan, which is the most important thing. You can see V-shape, momentum up, momentum down, got the little reaction to the demand at that inside bar. The extreme was already mitigated by the inside bar. Got the failed reaction, which is obviously the close below the inside bar and the chalk, and then obviously the flip played out beautifully. Then following this, got basically the M1 IBOS. So it was valid to look for sales from there too. Like, that's pretty clean. You can see it reacted to that demand. So it's a textbook M1 continuation entry model, because it flipped that, it mitigated this flip zone, and it swept, so it met all the criteria, but the extreme just wasn't hit. Then when we came down into the M15 POI, as I said, it wasn't one I personally had on my radar to look for an entry. You can see we liquidated all these lows here. Then if you view that there as your last point of supply, you can see we pushed down, pulled back into it, failed to put in the new low, and then huge momentum to the upside. So this was more than valid to look for an entry if you had the POI on your radar. Personally, I didn't, and I think the refined sort of inside bar was just missed anyway. But that was valid, as it was pro M15 swing and internal. And then you can see here when we mitigated this, the M15 demand to cause the chalk. That's your chalk there. You could argue that little bar there is a flip, but personally that's too aggressive for me. Like, it's a very small candle, very minor reaction. Then you had the extreme completely unmitigated, so unless you wanted to get super aggressive with your entry model there, but personally that's too aggressive for me. And that is it. That's EU. Beautiful entry model. It's just a shame the POI was spiked through, otherwise it would have been all over it. And then no tag on the DCE, and then this here sort of makes sense in hindsight, but the POI I didn't have on my radar really. So that's EU. AU, obviously, like all the other pairs, are obviously tanking. See, this is the most recent leg down. So now we've had sort of a decent bullish candle, so possible that we will get the pull back towards the EQ of the leg, but no bullish chalk around in the signal that this is imminent yet. We're currently pausing in this minor demand. Obviously it's only wicks, but it is pausing. So if this fails, could potentially look for you get the flip zone, but then you have to be cautious. There is this sort of daily demand that price could just mitigate this and then roll over to the downside. So yeah, daily I was happy to look for buys to potentially target this here, while also being aware of the fact that we are heavily bearish. On the 4 hour then, had the bullish IBOS, which is obviously a pretty decent sign. We're getting the pullback in to mitigate this little flip zone here. You can see it's a flip because it reacted to this here. It's obviously only wicks, but it's not ideal, but it is at the EQ of the sort of range as well, so it makes sense going to play out. But it's pretty weak follow through. You can see price sort of struggling to push up there, so it wouldn't surprise me. Maybe we come down here before we continue higher. But yeah, I was happy to look for buys on the M15 to potentially catch the next leg to the upside and run the weak internal 4 hour low as part of the 4 hour pullback. The M15 then, use bar replay. So this is just pre-London. It obviously had the nice sweep of liquidity here, took out that low, mitigated this inside bar, and then had the bullish chalk, which gave us this fresh demand to trade from. So I was happy to look for an entry within that, thinking that price could potentially pull back in and then rocket to the upside and run the weak internal low and potentially the swing high, or the weak internal high, sorry, and then the swing high. But price just tanked through without giving us an entry. Personally, I wasn't then looking for another entry from within this POI, purely because it had already been mitigated, caused a decent move away, but failed to take out the high. So there was a decent probability in my mind that perhaps we would have come down here to the extreme, which was completely unmitigated. So I personally wasn't dropping down to the M1 here. I sort of once this low sort of failed, it took my eye off it and basically had me alert set here and here for the M15 shock, and then just waited for one of those to go off before I was looking for anything in particular. And then you can see we got the swept the low, mitigated the EQ of this here, huge momentum to the upside, bullish chalk, and then at this point I was looking for price to pull back into this demand, because obviously swing and larger internal are both bullish. So then I think we pulled back. Yeah, we didn't quite pull back in, we just sort of mitigated the EQ of the range, didn't quite mitigate the pivot, which is fine. The market doesn't always do what we want. Again, ran this weak internal low, but no close above it, and then sort of now we have come into this demand here. So it remains to be seen whether that holds. Technically, this whole leg is weak, as this low failed to cause price to close above the high, so we could very easily fail here. In all probability, yes, internal and swing are bullish. This is still the larger internal range is holding price, but given how corrective that is, it wouldn't be beyond the realms of possibility to see price continue lower. But obviously, react, don't predict. We just play it as we see it. And then the M1, the only potential entry would have been if you were happy to look for another entry from this M15 POI. You can see it had already been mitigated, but you can see we liquidated sort of these lows, all that liquidity. It hit a nice refined M1 zone there, which is another positive confidence factor. Then again, the entry model in isolation is pretty clean. See, you got the push down, pull back into the supply, the last point of supply, reaction, failed to put in a new low, reaction failed, and then got the chalk. So then at that point, that was the logical entry, but obviously there was no tag on it on there. So yeah, missed the one potential entry on EU, but it didn't fit my plan on it. I'm more than happy to have passed on it. As we saw sort of afterwards, that liquidity sweeps can be quite unreliable, and that we sort of swept the high again here, and what was a bear shock, and in this case there was no follow through, it was just basically a pullback in display. And yeah, so that's EU and AU. If you've any questions around about this, guys, just tag me on one of the public channels and I'll get back to you. Thanks for listening, and hope you took some value from that. Thanks, guys.